joined today by the District 3 candidates. We have James Corcoran. Good morning, James.
Good morning.
And we have Seema Singh Perez. Good morning.
Hello.
And we're going to chat just for a few minutes about just things in general about the district, but also, of course, about the citywide election. And we can't say it enough. Please, people, understand that you're going to vote in every district. You're not just going to vote in your district. There's been a lot of confusion about that, more than I remember. I'm not sure what has made this one more difficult. Maybe more people are getting involved. I think that's probably true. People are voting who've not voted before. So what you may not understand is that you voted for your district only in the primary, but you will vote in every district for the general. So that's what we're approaching with 16 days. Seema,
16 days.
16 days. We just did the count, so we have 16 days. Early voting is already underway, so please get out and do that. Go ahead and just take care of your civic duty. It's a good thing to do, but definitely vote. Don't let it go by. So we're going to start with just a general question about your background. If you'll just tell people, what made you decide to do this thing? What's your background that led you to this point? Just a little bit about yourself so people get to know you. Seema, you want to start with it?
Sure. There's not one thing that led me to this point by any means. I think everything I've done throughout my life has led here. I grew up with a very big sense of social justice and civic engagement. So that's probably the biggest thing. Every job I've taken, I've always tried to see it as being involved in the world in one way or another. Now, this is not where I thought I was headed by any means. This is just in the last year and a half that I started considering running for office. Most of it was I did not feel that the government was representing me in a lot of different facets. My ethnicity, my being a woman, my socioeconomic class, just a lot of things. So I wanted to see somebody who represented me, and I thought, well, I guess that's going to be me. I've always been involved in politics, in paying attention to everything that's going on. So it hasn't been a far stretch. I mean, it's been a really big learning curve, but it's very exciting. I am learning so much, and no matter what happens, it's definitely up to my level of engagement.
Very good. James?
I'm an attorney, and most of my practice is in juvenile court, so I've been dealing with how the opiate problem has been affecting kids. And to be honest, I wasn't really politically minded really at all until a few years back when my own kids were born. I just started kind of taking a look around and seeing the world. Obviously, I get a slightly skewed perspective dealing in the area of the law that I deal with. But when I'm seeing all the problems that these kids are having to face, and knowing that these kids are going to be going to school with my children, it started causing me to think about what can I do to help the area make it a better place so that my kids and everyone else's kids can grow up in as good of a place as possible. That's sort of when I really started thinking a little bit more politically, and had I ran for office last year, was unsuccessful, but a lot of people were very supportive, and as a result of that, a lot of people asked me to run. Like, for example, Lynn Redmond, who's very active in the Norwood community, and some other folks have just said that they were looking for some good people to get involved, and I was kind of just surprised and grateful that people thought that I'd be qualified.
Very good, very good. Well, you mentioned something there, and I'm going to go a little off script here already. I got, 2.5 minutes into it before I did that. You mentioned the opioid crisis. That's obviously an issue that cuts across, like some of the categories you just mentioned, Seema. It doesn't really matter race. It doesn't really matter socioeconomic status. That's a problem. How big of a problem do you see that being for our community, the Knoxville community? And what are some solutions that you think, or some ideas that you think City Council might pursue, on a local level to try to address some of that? Is there anything that City Council can do? Seema, let's bounce it back to you.
I think definitely. I mean, it cannot do everything. This is a national problem, and there's not a simple solution to it at all. But I think everybody needs to be involved in doing what they can. it is a huge problem. Right now it affects every aspect of society. In trying to find employees for our electrical business, it's really hard to find people right now, and a lot of it is that the workforce is under the influence, not just the opioids, but the whole systemic issues that are going on that have led to it. What I think the city council, well, one program that I have seen, read about is in Buffalo, New York. And they have set up a whole task force using the court system. The police also go with there's social service people involved, and the way they're specifically addressing it, not just as any other criminal issue, they're looking at it from different facets. There is the criminal aspect of it, there's also the socio, there's the economic, there's the needing rehabilitation, all of that, getting a job, getting housing. So it's looking at the big picture of it, and I think City Council can get involved in that.
James, thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's in terms of just numbers. There have been statistics out there that put Knoxville, I think, at about number 8 in the nation in most drug-riddled cities. And obviously, it's a nationwide problem. But you know that number says to me that we're having more than our fair share of that problem. And you know, one of the concerns I've had just in general is that it seems like every level of government to some extent has tried to put the blame off onto someone else, but I think it's a responsibility of our local government, you know, city, county, state, federal, it goes all the way up. And you know, one example that I think we've seen of you know, where we can start being creative is in our own district. We just put in the safety center. Now there was a lot of better ways it could have been done in terms of the way they actually chose the location, and you know, that's one thing that we've certainly heard a lot about from the folks in our district. You know, that felt like it was more chosen by Helen Ross McNabb, the location, than chosen by the government. But that issue aside, the fact that the city, county, and state were all able to chip in and actually, you know, reach you know, for that common goal, I think is a good blueprint going forward. It's you know, it's concerning that right now we've got 20% less police on the street than we did 20 years ago, and obviously it's, you know, drugs create crime, not just the possession, but you know, obviously there's all sorts of issues that come along with it, from petty theft to, you know, we've also seen a rise in violent crime that, you know, at least in part is probably connected. So, you know, I think we sort of need to take a bit of a carrot and a stick approach. We need more law enforcement available, and I'm not talking about punishing the people who have found overdose. In fact, state law was recently changed that the people who have just overdosed are actually immune from prosecution on those calls. But if we actually have more law enforcement with more time on their hands as a result of being better staffed, they might be in a position to better investigate the source of the drugs. Because, you know, we've got, in the 3rd district, we're averaging between 30 and 40 drug overdose calls a week. And, you know, each of those is potentially a crime scene that we could potentially look into what the source of those drugs is. Because, you know, I'm all for treatment. You know, we absolutely need it. But one thing I've learned in my practice is the success rate of drug treatment, especially with the harder drugs like heroin, is just unfortunately low. I would say probably, you know, less than 5% of the folks I've dealt with have achieved long-term sobriety, even with, you know, access to treatment, like from the Department of Children's Services. So, you know, I think we need to do a better job of prevention in addition to encouraging the access to treatment.
You mentioned police, and that's certainly a citywide issue. It's always an issue. You know, how big a police force do you need? What kind of training do they need? There's multiple issues there. When you talk about we've got fewer police on the street than we had before, I'm surprised to hear that. I didn't realize that. The only way to get more police on the street is to hire more policemen. I mean, and it's an expensive endeavor. It's not a cheap thing. So I guess I'd love for each of you, and you can go ahead and finish the thought, and then we'll come to you, Seema. But just in terms of that, are you in favor of increasing the police force in a large way? And if you are, how do we pay for that?
Well, obviously, it's one of the biggest parts of our budget. So it's, you know, we'll have to find, you know, other areas where we can cut. You know, to some extent, I think, you know, there's some areas we can make, you know, better choices. We just increased our budget, our spending 16% this year over last year. So obviously there was, you know, some money available. You know, I could think of something that we quadrupled our spending on sidewalks, and I'm all for sidewalks, but there's a lot of cost associated with that. And right now, if we're having issues like I'm all for greenways, but we've had people killed on our greenways recently. So my thought would be make sure that they're safe first, and then put the safety as a priority, and then spend on the more luxury issues.
So you see sidewalks and greenways as the luxury things that would come after establishing safety and so forth.
It has to be a balance. If you take it, but to some extent, I think if we really just make some better choices, like for example, we just finished the sidewalk on Ray Mears, 333 feet of sidewalk cost the city $425,000. A lot of that was in right-of-way purchases, and the explanation for that choice was that it was to get bus access to the VA services down there. Which, quite frankly, I think we could have probably just moved the bus stop, which at the time was just a sign. So if we could have just moved that right across the street from the VA, put a crosswalk in, and not spent that money in that area, I think we need to take a better look at how we're spending our money.
Seema, talk to us about police force. Would you like to expand the police force? If so, how would you pay for it and all that?
I think in speaking with the police department, they are on the right path. They have new students in the academy. They are in the process of hiring more. I think they're doing fine. We need to keep the force up. We need to keep supporting them. But I think the thing we could do that's best for them is stop expecting them to take care of everything for us. We have this attitude that they're going to fix all of our problems, and we put a lot on them that is not their responsibility. I think we need to branch out and get some more support staff for them that can deal with some of the issues that, teachers and police, we give them the responsibility of fixing everything in our society, to be our parents, to be our social workers, to enforce crime in the house, out of the house, everything, which, crime is what they're supposed to do, but not the social work aspects of it, not the support staff aspect of it. So that's where I would like to put some focus, is on picking up responsibilities that aren't necessarily related to crime issues that the police department has found themselves dealing with.
Let's do one more brief question about the district, and then we'll move on to more the larger city issues. The district we talked about before we started this interview I guess they're all odd in their own special way, but your special way for District 3 is that you have neighborhoods off of Middlebrook Pike, which is a certain kind of neighborhood. Well, there are different neighborhoods over there, but there are more affluent neighborhoods over there than you might find on Western Avenue, which is also in the district. And they're different than the neighborhoods you might find off Clinton Highway, which they tend to be more of a rural kind of population and so forth. So you go from more or less affluent suburban to more inner city and ethnically diverse to more rural and so forth. So that's just my characterization. You might disagree with it, but how do you look at a district like that and govern? How do you represent all those different kinds of constituencies, I guess would be one thought. But mostly, what do you see as the main issues in your district that are maybe unique to your district or not? Any thoughts on that? See, you didn't get to answer the first one.
Okay.
The other one first last time, so you go ahead.
Most of Knoxville is like that there are different pockets that are very different, with different needs and socioeconomically. Like Lonsdale area, the part that's even Norwood area, there are, I think, 20 different languages spoken in that area. So that's probably unique to 3rd District more so than other parts of the city.
Well, as you're going around through the different populations, I guess my question is, what are you hearing from people? What are you hearing that in 3rd District they're really concerned about?
It's the same thing as everybody is. Living well, traffic, being safe, opioids, making sure that they have a job that pays the bills, living well, quality of life.
I mean, I've heard a lot of the same things that Seema's mentioned. One thing I've sort of heard is that when you think of Northwest Knoxville, it's hard to really think of something outside of perhaps Victor Ashe Park of what's a main draw or what's a main attraction. To a large extent, we've kind of become this sort of drive-through community, that place that people go in an effort to get somewhere else. We had a Kroger on Western Avenue that's closed, and not seeing a whole lot stepping up to take its place. Don't have a whole lot in the way of restaurants. So we're missing out on a lot of the development that some areas of the town have put in. So one of the themes of my campaign is making sure that each area of the town gets its fair share. We've done a whole lot for downtown, and it's great, but a lot of our commercial corridors, including Western Avenue, have to a large extent been neglected. And so one thing I've heard is just what are we getting for Northwest Knoxville?
Right. Well, there are a lot of issues that as you said, you both have said, across all the different district areas. So let's just turn to a bigger picture for a few minutes. There are a lot of issues like environmental sustainability. There's walkability, multimodal transportation, fair and affordable housing, outside investment, trying to draw that in, whether it's local investment to a particular part of town or out-of-town investment into the city, supporting small businesses, investing in infrastructure, public amenities, and a lot of others. So which of those as a city that we're looking at as we wade through this morass, the new city council is going to have a lot of issues on the table when you step in the door. So what do you think the city council needs to prioritize out of all this? What's the big burning thing that we should really, as a city, say, okay, before we move on, we need to really focus on this? And maybe you've hit on some of them already, but James, let's start with you on this one.
I think I'd have to go back to law enforcement, at least with regards to it as it affects our district. Just Seema and I were both at an elementary school, and we were having to listen to the teachers talk about how even though they've got a park right by them, a lot of folks don't feel safe to let their kids play at them. So I'd really like to see a return to more neighborhood policing, and that's something I think that the current administration is really doing a good job of doing in terms of trying to encourage efforts to recruit law enforcement from the community. Because I think that one way that we've avoided, to a large extent, a lot of the problems that we've seen in the nation as a whole in the media lately is by making those efforts to make sure that our law enforcement is similar to the folks that they serve. I think if we recruit from the neighborhood, if folks of law enforcement in the community are the same people, I think it puts us all on the same side. So definitely making sure that our kids have safe places to play, and safe places to grow up. Certainly seems to be. It's my priority.
Seema, you step into city council and they say, okay, Seema, we're going to defer to you. You get to decide where we attack first. What are we going to do?
Economy. Okay. Economics. Raising the standard of living for all Knoxvillians. I would like to see a lot more local businesses supported, and I would like to see all the areas of Knoxville doing well. Knoxville is very segregated, socioeconomically as well as by race. And you can drive through the city and see what areas have been affected and which ones are doing well. So economics is my largest concern.
How do we encourage small business? I mean, that's a nice thing. We all would agree. If I asked you each, should we encourage small business? Of course, we're all going to say emphatically yes, maybe pound the table. But how do we do that? What can city council do to encourage economic development? Whether you want to think about the 3rd district right now, or you want to just all across the city. What power does city council have to do that? How can they do that? Okay. Seema, go ahead, and then we'll come over.
One of the things I'd really like to look at is the incentive plans that we use to bring businesses into Knoxville. I think they really need to be examined. There have been a lot of studies done that we put in a lot of incentives, and what comes back does not lift the local economy. So I would like to see some of those incentives prioritized towards small businesses. There are a lot of different things going on in Knoxville right now. We have a status of a maker city, and like the Standard Knitting Factory, the mill, they are redeveloping that, and they want to try to make it multi-use and have shared spaces so that 4 or 5 different businesses can use the same amount of space, and that way they're saving money and it's just sharing resources. And I think these are some good directions that we're going in.
Okay.
Well, my law office is on the corner of Central and Broadway, and I think we were talking before we went live that we got the benefit of those facade grants that went in, and I'd like to see some of that spread out a little bit more evenly across the city. Because my law practice at the time was basically just a sort of a loose collection of 5 attorneys that weren't really affiliated with each other. Most of us are, we're all really public interest and child welfare related, so not what you traditionally think of when you think of a law firm. But if you take a look at, say, the way the area Happy Holler has developed around that as a result of that attention being provided in that area, I think there's some areas that could benefit, particularly along our commercial corridors. Broadway, Chapman Highway, Western Avenue. If you start thinking about what businesses are actually along those commercial corridors, unfortunately a lot of it's become, you see a lot of the predatory lending, a lot of checking to cash places, sort of fly-by-night operations, and not a lot of long-term business that contribute to the community as opposed to taking away from it. And I think that if we start expanding our focus to our commercial corridors in terms of those types of grants, or I'm not the biggest fan in the world of TIFs and pilots, but we've used those to a lot of success downtown. If we could make sure that we provide those out in a responsible way that actually ensures that we grow the local economy, that we actually employ local employees, that we're using on projects that create jobs instead of just creating a one-time job for the construction. I think that those could be tools that we could use to help expand our economy, and instead of just having this narrow focus in one area. The other concern I've got is we've been picking our projects sort of one at a time. Like right now, a lot of focus is on Magnolia, and I'm all for helping out Magnolia. But I think if you broadcast to that extent that you're going to have your the city's going to be spending all its money in one area, it creates this opportunity for folks to basically swoop in, buy up the real estate at low cost, and then just sit on it until these few really wealthy developers are the ones who are benefiting it exclusively, instead of the people that we're actually trying to help, the people who actually have lived in those neighborhoods.
Well, let's talk about the corridors, because you mentioned it. It's a good point. It's interesting to think about. Knoxville is kind of like a wheel hub with spokes going out in a way that I don't know if other cities are that way or not, but we're clearly that way with Kingston Pike and with Chapman Highway and with Magnolia and Broadway and Central being the primary ones. But kind of moving off the grid a little, then you have Middlebrook Pike as another long kind of corridor, and that certainly impacts y'all's district. Clinton Highway would be another one that we could name. But you've got those main ones, and other than Kingston Pike, which is its own kind of mess as you go out, the description you made there fits every one of those. Broadway, Chapman, Magnolia, certainly, and Central to an increasingly less degree. Central seems to be righting itself in some kind of respects, but those are difficult situations because predatory loaning business, that might be how you would characterize it. If I owned it, I might would, that's the problem. And these are small businesses too, and they're operating, they think, serving in a vacuum. Maybe they're taking advantage. But how does city council can't come in and say, okay, well, we don't like these businesses, so you guys can move away, and now we're gonna, and how do you do what you said as far as focusing on an area but not letting people know ahead of, I don't know how you do that. Think about the Cumberland Avenue remake. That's taken years, so it'd be kind of hard to sneak up on that and overnight say, poof, here we go. So how do we do that? And let's pick a corridor just for focus. Let's say Magnolia. You mentioned Magnolia. Let's talk about Magnolia. A plan was put forward. residents were invited to be engaged during the process, but then didn't feel somehow like part of the process in the end. Not sure exactly how that went wrong. I'd love to hear your opinions about that. But what could we do in an area like Magnolia, or how do you feel about the Magnolia corridor plan as it stands? So let's start with you. You were talking.
I mean, I think it's certainly it's an area that needs attention, and obviously we've put a lot of time and effort into it. Part of the reason why I think that a lot of folks from the area don't feel like their voices were heard, because like you said, it's been coming a long time. Some of that problem, I think, is in how we approach a lot of our information gathering. A lot of these meetings are set up during the daytime when anyone who has to work aren't available. And I think we're in the information age, and finding some ways for some of these meetings to occur with people participating in some sort of online fashion, or there's got to be a better way to be a little bit more inclusive than just scheduling something during the morning when most people are at work. I certainly don't believe in abandoning the Magnolia project, but right now we're in the recode process, and one thing I do think that's a great opportunity to is using our zoning laws to maybe open up a little bit more of our commercial areas to other types of development. I mean, the big buzzword right now is mixed-use development. If you were to take something that traditionally would have just held, like a Kroger's, and now allow those folks to actually build up, where there can be at street level, there can be commercial areas, and then they can offset their costs by having residential areas on top. They can sort of take a two birds with one stone approach, in that you're defraying the cost of that commercial activity, which makes it more attractive to businesses. And then on top of it, it's also, we've got a huge housing problem in the city in terms of just there's just not enough of it. There's not enough of it at lower cost, and I think by using those types of mixed-use development down each of our commercial corridors, it'll give us that opportunity to have both additional housing, hopefully some workforce housing as well, and defraying the cost so that more businesses might see it as a more attractive opportunity.
Okay. Seema?
One of the problems I see with the Magnolia corridor, I love that they're getting to that area. I think what a lot of residents, right now we've been doing downtown and then slowly moving out concentrically. I think we would do better if we started looking at different neighborhoods, and not necessarily just moving out, but finding the areas that need the most help. I think a lot of people were wanting the work in East Knoxville to start much farther out east, so that from downtown to the Burlington area, it would encourage the rest of Magnolia to have gotten filled in with businesses. If you drive by there right now, half of everything is closed. So I think that's one of the problems with the Magnolia corridor. The other thing is, downtown was started with small local businesses. It wasn't the large developments. That it was Scott West, it was Mahasti, Tomato Head, Lucille's, and I think encouraging that through the corridors is what we need to do.
We are back, and I have a couple of guests with me this morning. We're talking about District 3, we're talking about the City Council race, and I'm James Corcoran and Seema Perez. And we're going to wrap up with a couple of questions. I just want to bring up something that for people who live downtown, who come and go on Broadway from downtown, is a pronounced and obvious problem. But I think really, even in a wider swath of the city, you see little indications that we have a problem with homelessness. Certainly panhandling kind of intersects, but those are two different pools in a lot of other respects. But it's just homelessness in general. And so I would love to hear each of you kind of address, what do you think City Council's role is in working with our homeless population? What kind of answers are you inclined toward? Are you inclined toward housing first kind of approach? If so, how do we get that kick-started again? Because it seems like we did some of that and then we stopped as a city. Just what would your approach or your general perspective on the homelessness?
Broadcasting from the shadows of Neyland Stadium on the University of Tennessee campus,
it's a
Volunteer
very complex
Radio is
problem, and I think, each person on council can bring their own different perspective to it. For me personally, I do a lot. As I've said before, I do a lot of work with children in foster care, and nationwide, 5 out of every 8 homeless people were in foster care or state's custody growing up. And right now, as we're sitting here today, we have about 800 kids in foster care from Knox County, which is about double what it was 10 years ago. Obviously, largely contributed to by the opiate problem.
So by your statistics, that would be predictive of 500 additional homeless people. And since we know statistically they, contrary to public opinion, sometimes do stick near where they're from, we're looking at a whole new homeless population that we're growing there.
Right. And one of the big problems that I've seen in dealing with our current foster care system is that the state has a bunch of money earmarked to transitional housing for children. Is if they turn 18, if the ones who were not adopted out, the ones who are aging out of foster care, there's all sorts of state and federal money that's already earmarked to transitional housing. The only requirement is basically that the kids have to check in with a social worker every so often, and they have to stay in some sort of school program. It can either be continuing high school, working on a GED, college level, technical classes, anything like that. So the funds are there, and I think if we just make some efforts to actually just get some transitional housing started for them, we can be proactive in preventing homelessness at its biggest source, in my opinion.
Right.
So it's certainly a very complex problem. My office is just down the block from CARM, so I see it every day, and it's a terrible issue, and it's something that it's only going to get worse if we don't sort of get in front of it. So I think that at least starting with the transitional housing for people who are just becoming adults, it's probably also a little bit more politically palatable for a larger segment of the population, because I think it's hard to make any sort of argument that those kids are homeless due to anyone's fault. I mean, it's not their fault.
Right.
I mean, I don't think anyone would argue with me on that point. That if you're turning 18 and the state's dumping you out on the street, I think most people would agree that that's something that's at least in part all of our responsibility to deal with. So that's where I'd like to start.
Okay. All right, Seema.
First thing I'd like to say is sometimes when people start with the statement, the homeless issue, what they're talking about is the issue that we have to drive through them, that they being in our way is the problem. And that's a big problem. The issue is that these people do not have homes. There are a lot of different reasons that they don't have homes. There are different populations of people that are homeless. There is drugs and alcohol, that is a part of it. Mental illness is a big part of it. Economics is probably the largest part of it. Right now, there are about 2,000 people at any point in time that are homeless in Knoxville area. That does not include the people who are going around from friends' couches or staying here or there for a little while, and they may be homeless for a while and then they figure out a place to stay. So it's a much larger problem than just having to drive through people getting in our way. I had gone to one meeting and somebody was talking about the homeless issue, and that's what they meant. And that just really, I can't get that out of my system hearing that. My brother was homeless for a very long time. He was mentally ill. He went in and out of jail and was oftentimes homeless. He passed away a couple years ago. And he had a master's degree in business. So it's not what it always looks like. If you want to look at it economically in just that way, it would behoove us to do housing first. I think when Knoxville started it, the Mandevilla project ended up costing a lot more than was intended. So that needs to be looked at. How can we do that with better costs? But right now, the cost to society, crime, decency, quality of life, we would do better by figuring out how to provide housing and safety for everybody.
Very good. All right, we're going to wrap up here, and I told you each that I would give you just a minute or so to talk about, as I go to the voting booth, as everyone goes to the voting booth, why we should pull the lever for you, or push the electronic button. I guess there's no levering. I dated myself. So go ahead, Seema.
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
okay.
You're talking. Yeah.
Well, I was raised in the South, and I'm an Indian woman, so I'm very humble. It's hard for me to talk about why you should vote for me, but I'm going to struggle through that anyway. One of the reasons is I think we need to have more diversity on the city council. We need to be able to represent more of the people in Knoxville. I'm an immigrant. I am a woman of color. My background is in social work, so also representing a diversity in the expertises and professions that are on city council. Having a diverse city council is not just about the way that it's going to look. It's about bringing experiences, struggles, and challenges that the dominant culture may not look at. I think we have an amazing group of people running right now, and I think we'll do well with whatever combination come through. But I do think we need some diversity of experiences on there, and I think I provide that.
Very good. Thank you. James?
Well, to my knowledge, I'm the only child welfare attorney that's tried to get a position on the city council. I've also worked with the Tennessee Lawyers Assistance Program, which helps dealing with impaired professionals and both helping get them access to treatment as well as getting them, making sure that the public is protected from impaired lawyers. I currently sit on the Board of Zoning Appeals, so I have experience in dealing with zoning issues. I have a number of endorsements. My favorite endorsement is that of the 3rd District, and that they select me by just under 50% of the vote in a 4-way race. Also endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, by the Firemen's Union, by the Knox Area Association of Realtors, and I think that my experience in dealing with folks who have substance abuse issues brings a necessary experience given the crisis that the city is currently experiencing with regards to the drug problem. And I think also my legal training would be an asset, given this is a legislative body for the city. I mean, that's what the city council is. We're there to draft legislation through our ordinances. So I think that those would qualify me to be a voice that can help a huge segment of the population in Knoxville.
Very good. I want to thank you both. I appreciate you not gouging each other's eyes out, or
we're still on the air.
Using foul language. As soon as the video and the radio is cut off, we'll go with that. No, I appreciate you both. You both seem like very, very good, genuinely interested people who would do a fine job for city council. So thank you for being here, James. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Seema,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we're going to take a brief musical interlude at this moment that I will not be able to hear, but hopefully you can enjoy it. I hope the music's been enjoyable. I can't hear it this morning. It's too bad because I picked some great tunes. At any rate, we'll take a little break and we'll be right back and look at the upcoming week in downtown Knoxville.